Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I guess I should mention US history and the law as well. Um, I recently did a video discussing the establishment and escalation of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, and I did mention the role of Europeans. So I'm going to use an analogy of a skit I like to watch. I've seen several times. It's a skit on a Scotland Yard police chief who calls a presser, right, in order to apologize for a previous presser that he'd given, in which he made a politically incorrect statement through his idiomatic expressions. And while he's apologizing for his earlier politically incorrect statement, he shoots himself in the foot again by making another uh, politically incorrect statement, right? Um, for instance, when he's saying things like, well, it is like the blind leading the blind, and then he has to come out and apologize to members of the blind community, right? They're there. And while he's apologizing to the members of the blind community, he commits another blunder by saying, well, your words didn't fall on deaf ears and the apparently offends the members of the deaf community. So uh, I thought it was an interesting analogy because I like to give balance, when I'm discussing history, and so where I had been demonstrating that, well, that it is inaccurate to say that it was Jewish people who established or expanded slavery. They were incidental participants because they assimilated into the European community, that the Europeans were the ones who established and expanded slavery. By the way, I've done, other videos showing that, that Black Americans or Africans also participated in slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, and so today what I'm going to do is show how Europeans participated and actually died in the civil rights movement. So I'm discussing the assassination of, you know, Viola Liuzzo. She was a white woman who unfortunately was killed by the Ku Klux Klan in her involvement and participation in the Selma to Montgomery march in 1965. She was murdered March 25, 1965, while riding in her 1963 Oldsmobile car, which she had used to volunteer to shuttle marchers in the civil rights march from Selma to Montgomery. So it was a very large march, and she had responded to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s call that members of all faiths across the nation should participate in the civil rights march. Um, and of course, uh, the her involvement was actually also a um, it was precipitated by earlier murders. An African American man had been murdered in Selma, in Alabama. I think it was in Selma. Jimmy Lee Jackson. He was a 26-year-old, and subsequently there were other planned marches, and a white pastor from Boston by the name of James Reeb had been beaten to death by white supremacists, a white mob. He was involved in the march in Selma, and so here was Viola Liuzzo. She lived in Detroit, Michigan, and she got concerned and felt that everybody should get involved in the fights for civil rights on behalf of African Americans. Now, let me just give a little backstory of Viola Gregg. Greg Liuzzo. It's funny that she was originally from the South, from Tennessee. She came from a very poor family, and so you see that all sorts of people, all walks of life, were involved in the civil rights, protest and activism on behalf of Black Americans. So if normally when people talk about whites being involved in the civil rights movement, it seems like it's just the white elite, the Hollywood clique. Of course, we know people like Marlon Brando, Charlton Heston. The participants. They were very active. They were very active and involved. In the civil rights movement. In the '60s and the '50s. But there were indigent white Americans as well, and Greg uh, Viola Liuzzo. She was a mother of five. She was young. She was assassinated when she was killed. She was just 39 years old. And life hadn't been easy on her, but she felt that calling. At the time, she was heavily involved in her church. And, she lived in Detroit. And she was concerned about what was going on in the South. And she volunteered her car and drove all the way down to Selma, and she helped in shuttling, marchers. At the time she was assassinated, there was an young African American in her car, a 19-year-old. Now they were ambushed and she was shot twice in the head by a members in a members of the KKK who were driving, and they waylaid their vehicle. Now the person she was riding with, that's the 19-year-old African American civil rights activist, he feigned to be dead. So the members, when the KKK uh, uh, members who had shot at her, they thought he was dead, and they left him for dead. Eventually, um, they were. It turned out that one of the people in the vehicle was actually an FBI informant. His name was Gary T. Rowe. He was an FBI informant, and I think one of the terrible fallouts from the whole incident was that the FBI, under actually was J. Edgar Hoover himself, the FBI director. He started a smear campaign defaming Viola uh, Viola Liuzzo in order to cover up the FBI informant's involvement, right? Uh, so the FBI informant had prior to the attack called the FBI and told them that the KKK was going to be involved, and they planned on being violent. So the FBI could have prevented the assassination of Viola Liuzzo, but instead, J. Edgar Hoover would go on to launch a smear campaign. In fact, defaming her, saying that that she was a drug user, that needle marks were found on her and things like that, and tried to smear her that she was having sex with the African American, which was not the case. An autopsy found that there were no drugs in her system. None of that was true. She had not recently had sex. None of that was true. So it shows the unfortunate, her assassination shows how unfortunate that era was. When the KKK used all sorts of intimidation, and the FBI, in trying to dismantle the KKK, they would use their informants to infiltrate the KKK, and it would turn out that people working for the FBI were, just because they're trying to infiltrate and dismantle the KKK, they got involved themselves in violence against Black Americans. In any event, nobody was convicted. For all the three people who were charged for the murder of Viola Liuzzo were acquitted. They were all acquitted. Uh, but three of them were sentenced to about 10 years for the violation of the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, which criminalized intimidation of African Americans or attempts to subvert their civil rights. So that's ironically that's what the her assassins were uh, convicted of, right? So it was a landmark case, given I think it was in the fact that they were an all-white male jury convicted her murderers for violating the civil rights uh, of the African American, and not the, unfortunately, they didn't convict them for the assassination of a white woman who that's Viola Greg Liuzzo. Um, so the history of the United States race relations has been very complex, and of course, this is Black History Month, and that's why I'm discussing it. In any event, it's interesting that her murder, however, her assassination would serve as a catalyst, expediting the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act and its signing by under President Lyndon B. Johnson. So I'm discussing this unfortunate assassination in honor of Black History Month. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.